Our next guest is David Lawrence from Frontier Economics, a very well-known consultancy, and has a very interesting employee model as well. So, David, if you would like to come up, I am going to bring you up. David is one of the economists on the team, and I am about to bring you up. Hopefully, you will appear shortly. There you go. Hi,
Hi.
David. Welcome.
Thanks very
Welcome.
much, Terry.
And great. Well, looking forward to hear you talk about your organisation and how it started and what the key aspects you'd like to discuss are. Particularly, well, you look pretty young to me. I mean, how did you?
Yeah.
It'd be interesting to talk about that in a bit. But yes, so give us your little overview of frontier economics.
Yeah.
Thank you. I'll leave you.
Thanks, Terry. And I just wanted to start off by saying thanks to introduction to WBG, and thought that all sounded like really valuable work. And I wasn't aware of your organisation before, but I'll definitely be looking into your research in a bit more detail after this. As Terry said, my name's David. I'm an economic consultant at Frontier, where I work in our public policy and competition practice areas. I probably look young because I only joined Frontier in 2016 after finishing my master's in economics. So, I mean, as an economist, I've got to start off with a few statistics on Frontier. So we're a team of 250 economic consultants across 7 offices in Europe. Our biggest office is in London, but we also have offices in Dublin, Madrid, Paris, Berlin, Cologne, and Brussels. Not that we've been into the office much recently. As Terry was saying, we have quite an interesting ownership model. We're 100% owned by our employees. We've just passed our 20th birthday as a company. Now, probably at least some of you are wondering what on earth an economic consultancy actually does, which is a fair question. I think the quick answer is that we use economics to provide advice on real world problems for clients, and those clients can be companies, they can be charities, regulators, governments, a real mix. The slightly longer answer is that we do 4 main types of work. So public policy work, kind of helping to design, monitor and evaluate government policies. Competition policy work, so helping to evaluate the competition implications of mergers and other conduct by firms that might be harming competition. Regulatory work, so kind of helping to design better regulations through work either for regulated companies or for regulators. And strategy work, kind of helping firms to develop strategies to compete better in their markets and understand their customers better. So what do I like about working at Frontier? I think probably 3 things stand out. First, it's a chance to be at the forefront of a lot of big economic and policy decisions, just to pick out a few things that we've worked on recently and some that I've worked on personally. We do a lot of work on strategies for combating climate change. So a lot of work with the UK Department for Transport on strategies to combat climate change in a range of industries, from domestic and international shipping to air travel to electric vehicles. Touching on some of what Anna was saying earlier in terms of inequality, we recently done some work on measuring gender and ethnicity pay gaps in a range of industries, and we've also done quite a lot of work on measuring the impact of minimum wages on jobs, particularly minimum wages for apprentices. And some of our work also touches on really important distributional questions as well. For example, we worked with the BBC, I guess it's now a couple of years ago, on whether over 75s should continue to receive free TV licenses. I think second, I get to use economic theory, but not completely uncritically. So think traditional economic theory is still actually useful for a lot of things. Well, at least microeconomics is. We don't do any really macroeconomics or forecasting or anything like that. But an economist toolkit is quite wide these days. We use psychology and behavioural economics a lot in our work. I think whenever consumers are involved, we have to think about biases that people might have and how that affects economic outcomes. And our work is very empirical. We always want to test our hypotheses with data. So we use econometrics and the occasional fancy bit of data science. And I think thirdly is the people and the culture at Frontier. So I think this is helped by the fact that we're kind of the employees own the company, but it means we've got a lot of independence and the ability to shape how we operate internally and what projects we take on for clients. That all sounds probably quite fluffy, but I mean, I joined 4 years ago as part of a cohort of 18 new joiners, and 15 of us are still at Frontier. I think that kind of retention is quite unique and probably speaks for itself. Anyway, I think I've probably got to the end of my 5 minutes, and I want to keep Terry happy. So I'll stop there, but very happy to take any questions about Frontier, my career path, or about applying to Frontier or anything else you're interested in.
Lovely. Thank you so much, David. That was really good and a really nice, in a nutshell, view of your organisation as well as yourself. And the first thing, I mean, yes, please do get some questions up about for David to do with frontier economics or about indeed his career path. But I could get the ball rolling with the fact you said a couple of times about the employee ownership model. Is that, do you think, why? Because it is quite a successful consultancy. Is that the core? I mean, the only other one the famous one is John Lewis, and so that's quite a key one up there. But do you think it's actually added to the success of the organisation?
Yeah, I think it was
Retention is a good point, though. Yeah.
Yeah, I think it was quite far-sighted when our founders set us up 20 years ago. I think they'd had a bad experience at another company and wanted to do things quite differently. And I think they're kind of giving the employees that amount of control. So we have a lot of, I think that compared to other organizations, there's a lot more communication, kind of from more senior staff as to kind of what the strategy of the firm is, and any kind of big decision about the firm kind of will often get voted on by the employees. So when we think about kind of moving offices, there'll be some options laid out, and all the employees will vote, and that vote will kind of have a big impact on what we do next. So I think there might be some challenges as we grow, because we kind of have been growing quite quickly, and that model kind of has kind of historically worked really well when we were a small organization, but we kind of we're going quite quickly, I think, because our work is successful, but kind of that kind of everyone talking to everyone and knowing everyone else becomes a bit more difficult when you're turning into a larger organization.
Absolutely, and communications is my area of expertise, and I forgot to say that at the beginning because I'm leading on comms for this festival. But yes, size does matter, but it's also about the ability to have your own voice in decisions is so important. But Andy from our team is actually asking, really following on just from what you said about there being actual challenges, Andy, to employees owning the company. I mean, is this something that you think could be a standard, or what kind of pitfalls do you think? Andy, would you like to come on up and have a chat with David yourself? Lovely, thank you.
I guess. Yeah, I'm curious. Do you think that, because it sounds like a great model, could that become like a more standard thing across companies?
Yeah, I don't particularly see any major obstacles to it. I guess there may be some particularly unique things about professional services firms that make it particularly easy for the model to be successful, but nothing really stands out as to why the model couldn't work a lot more widely. I think definitely it's a big selling point of people when they join the company, and I think it's a big reason why people stay. I think in terms of the challenges, I think kind of the communication side does become a bit more difficult. I think in the early days, kind of decisions could be made around the kitchen table kind of thing, and that's just not feasible anymore. But I think like if you have with enough imagination, I think you can come up with alternative ways of making those decisions still in a democratic way.
I mean, was it, can I ask, one of the things that appealed to you when you first thought of joining the organization? Was that a factor in you joining?
It was definitely one of them. I was interested in the work to start with, but kind of there are other economic consultancies out there, but none quite with the kind of culture and organizational setup that Frontier had. So I think it was definitely something that really stood out to me.
Great, thank you. Sounds like the future of work. Cheers.
Thanks, Andy. Thanks for that coming up. And just before we move on to another question, which is actually, what do you think of the basic minimum wage?
Yeah, that's a really good question, and I should say with the caveat, I did not individually work on this minimum wage piece, but I can definitely give you kind of my personal thoughts, if not the overall Frontier thoughts. And I think economists, at least sort of like 30 years ago, kind of overestimated a lot of them at the time were worried that minimum wages would cause unemployment to rise, because that was sort of a prediction of a basic economic theory. But I think today that view has kind of changed quite a lot, because we've seen what happens when minimum wages are introduced and have been able to measure that kind of empirically, and looking at how unemployment has changed as minimum wages have increased. And actually, kind of if there are kind of impacts on employment, they're generally quite small. So I think most economists are now relatively positive about minimum wages, at least at sort of the levels we have them today. I guess there's maybe a bit more uncertainty as to what would happen in a world where minimum wages were substantially higher, which is sort of like untested at this point. But definitely kind of an active research area. And
well, research is the actual other thing I was going to ask you about, is how do you go about doing that research? In fact, Edna was asking about women in places, was asking about actually to do with what Anna covered in, outside the UK benefiting from work from research findings. But how do you actually, and Edna, would that be of interest to you as well, to come up and find out from David how the research that you do in Frontier Economics could be wider spread as well? How do you define it? And initially, what do you research? And is it driven by? I love was it competition, strategy, and regulatory are the key areas, and competition particularly is an interesting one with the pandemic now having had its impacts. But start with research.
Yes. So I guess in terms of the kind of questions we tackle, we are often guided by our clients to some extent, because they sort of pay the bills as it were. So we kind of don't have quite as much freedom as an academic or a kind of pure research organization would. But I guess at least in following kind of clients' questions, we know we're working on something that will have an impact, because that's why they've asked the question. They're actually interested in the answer. And then in terms of how we go about the research, we're often quite data focused. So we're very aware of the different statistic kind of data sets that the government publishes, and a lot of us are kind of secure researchers. We sort of pass some qualifications that allow us to see, kind of go into these dark rooms in the government and look at individual company and individual person level data anonymized, but that allows us to do really cool research on kind of really detailed data on the UK population of firms and individuals. So yeah, definitely a lot of focus on
Numbers and
data. Yeah, and kind of for something like the minimum wage, it would be looking at past examples where the UK has increased its minimum wage and looking at how that's impacted different groups of how has that impacted fast food workers, how's it impacted workers in London versus workers in the northeast of England, and kind of trying to tease out what the implications of that are.
That's fascinating stuff, because that's the core of it. But then you said yourself about where you went to join the company as well, organization was the economic theories that you can apply. And in our hopefully increasing pluralism approach, is that something that you find you can you add later, or how does that come into bear, have some impact on what you're doing?
Yeah, I think we'd definitely be supportive of this, of pluralism. I think we're all sort of quite highly trained economists. Like, lots of us have gone through masters in economics,
Yes.
but part of what going through that process teaches you is kind of where the assumptions are in economics and where some of the flaws are, and kind of where economics needs to be complemented by other disciplines. So I think a bit of an example I gave earlier was kind of psychology, and how that has been integrated into economics, but there are also kind of other areas. Kind of, you can't always tackle a problem with data, or often sort of do a lot of interviews with people as well on some of our projects to kind of get at aspects that kind of pure data or pure economic theory struggles to deal with.
Do you find behavioural economics playing more of a role?
Yes, definitely. I think particularly where you're kind of dealing with end consumers. So firms, you might think kind of they've had the chance to, over long periods of time, like refine their decisions and face the discipline of kind of having to make a profit in the market, whereas consumers are much more capable of making mistakes and kind of continuing to make mistakes for kind of long periods of time. So I think wherever we deal with things like, there are certain markets, like, it's, to be honest, often the boring markets. It's like opening a bank account, or your energy supply stuff, which is kind of boring to think about, but people don't always kind of take the option that saves them the most money. And in those cases, kind of thinking through what psychology might be able to explain about how consumers behave is often really useful.
Absolutely. I mean, did that play a part in the BBC and over 75's project that you were talking about?
Yeah, so for we did the BBC has been doing some work on kind of whether it should continue to give over 75's free TV licenses, and they sort of came to Frontier to us. They didn't ask us to kind of make a recommendation, but they asked us to kind of do some analysis and sort of set out what the different options were, and kind of the pros and cons of those, and what it would mean for the BBC's finances, and how it would impact kind of over 75's and other age groups sort of now and in the future. So it's also quite a political decision as well, which we're kind of not completely qualified to weigh in on, but at least on kind of the at least on kind of the pure the pure kind of numbers side and what economics could say about it. We were kind of able to lay out the different options, and the BBC sort of looked at our work and probably combined it with their own thoughts, and they, at least originally, decided they weren't going to continue to fund this. They thought the money could be better used elsewhere, although I think that might be quite a controversial decision, so I'm not sure if it will.
I don't know. I'm sure there's a lot of views on that. But can we talk about the future, though? Andy's asked for people who are where you were 4 years ago, sort of joining Frontier Economics. Well, what are the skills that are ones to bring forward to join a company organization like this? What are you looking for?
Yeah, I think at some level you have to have an interest in economics, because that is a lot of what we do. Yeah, I guess that in some ways you can sort of split it into two parts. There's sort of the economics analytical side. You have to have some interest in data and some interest in kind of the policy and type questions that we try and answer in our research.
Actually, I might just bring Andy up.
Yeah.
Andy, would you just put your mic and camera on, please, to continue this questioning? So this is really interesting, because also from Andy's background as well. So you say, because did you do an economics degree? You did, didn't you, Andy?
No. My background's more marketing side of things. Well, I did notice Nicolette's question, like, do you employ non-economists?
Oh, where was that? I've missed some of these questions. I'm so sorry. Sorry. Okay. Yes, in fact, Nicolette, do you want to join us as well? Then we can have a little wider discussion. So please put your mic and camera on, Nicolette.
Yes, good idea, Terry, because it's very difficult getting questions in time with the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. Sorry, and I think I missed a few. I missed a couple. Sorry about that. But yeah, we're all here now.
It was a very good question which Andy asked, because I think we do need to think about the young people who are not, who are going to see the recording.
Yes. So yeah, you're saying about the skills that would get people, well, an interview or something. I mean, you're saying interest in economics, but also how open is the organisation to pluralist thinking? So does that play a part as well? I mean, what sort of wider thinking?
I think we definitely, I think there's a limit to kind of, if you don't believe, like, if you kind of fundamentally disagree with a lot of economic theory, then there kind of might be some limit as to whether you should work from Frontier. But I think more generally we're very interested in pluralist views, and we are trying to be innovative into how we answer clients' questions, and like the right answer isn't always to kind of fall back on economics. We're starting to hire different types of data scientists. I think often where like really a kind of a pure pluralist approach is needed, we're not necessarily the experts for that. So we often collaborate with academics or other research organizations who might have skills beyond economics that we don't have.
Can I broaden it out a bit? As somebody who is a trained economist, and one who started my career in consultancy, and I chose not to go to an economic specialist consultancy, but I went to ones which had real life, really big client problems, and I was the economist on the team, but I might be working with other functional specialisms.
Yeah.
And for me, and I would say to anybody, younger person watching, consultancy is a great place to start your career, because you get a breadth of organizational experience. You get often really interesting problems. You work with lots of other people. I wouldn't say it's necessarily a place you want to carry on with your career, but I thoroughly recommend it. So I'm talking from somebody that's talking, well, do you go to one of the excellent economic consultancies, of which there's quite a few, or do you go for order one? And both routes have their merits. I've done a bit of both, but I think looking back on it, I've really got more out of the ones where you're working in multifunctional, multidisciplinary teams. And it was that experience which actually made me so excited when economic pluralism as a movement was born, and why I was there right from the beginning.
Yes, it's definitely something that is changing, I think, in terms of what's happened over this year, but just in the last few years, last 5 years, there's been quite a shift. Would you say, David? I mean, since in 4 years, what have you seen, do you think, that has changed since you started?
I think, I think definitely clients, including the government, are kind of often more looking for a multidisciplinary approach now than they were 4 years ago. I think there are other bits of our work that probably haven't changed particularly. I think a lot of the kind of competition economics type analysis. So I've worked a lot for the past year for Facebook, where there's a lot of debate around what the future regulation of tech should look like, and kind of competition authorities in the UK and in Europe are maybe kind of becoming slightly more skeptical of large firms, but essentially the tools and the way they analyze markets, I think, are generally the same as they have been for the past 15 or 20 years.
Competition and technology is a really hot potato, I think. But going back to, and this is our probably final bit, please chip in, Andy, Nicolette, if you want to as well, but just about the focus of this festival is young people. And I just wanted to ask, in addition to what the skills is do you need an economics degree to be part of an organization like yours, or can other disciplines play a part?
I think so some people do join Frontier, for example, with a background in environmental studies or in kind of a specialist in energy. We would often encourage these, or we would require these people to sort of study part-time for a master's while they're at Frontier to get that economics grounding as well. But I think we're sort of open to people with different backgrounds, kind of with that caveat that we would kind of expect you to get up to a certain level in economics as well.
Oh, that's encouraging. No, but that does open it up, and I think more organisations are recognising you don't have to have just the core thing; it can be applied. Lovely. So, Andy and Nicolette, would you like to ask David anything else? Because if not, I think we have covered all our questions, and it's been fascinating. Thank you so much, David, and thank you, Nicolette and Andy, for your contributions too. So we can go back to the tables now and see if other people are around, and if you do have time to continue the discussion, I'm sure people will be grateful for that. Okay, so thank you and cheerio for now.
Thank you.